Hey everyone, welcome to lesson 6 of the Getting Started with Motion Graphics course here for Tuts Plus. My name is Vincent Nguyen, and today we're going to be taking a look at how to enhance motion graphics for realism and for movement within After Effects using some simple expressions as well as the graph editor within After Effects. And let's hop into After Effects here, and you can see that I have a few scenes set up. And let's go ahead and take a look at how keyframes play a role in this. So I'm going to create a new composition. And I'm just going to call this keyframes and hit OK. And let's go ahead and create a quick new background. So Control Command Y to bring up a new solid, and we're going to call this BG. And in the effects and presets, let's go ahead and drag in a ramp. And we'll make it a radial ramp for now. And we can change these colors to maybe a bright white and then a dark gray. And so in motion graphics, we're going to be using a lot of keyframes, a lot of expressions, and a lot of graph editor in pretty much every single project you do. So it's very, very important that you kind of get the idea and the importance of keyframes, types of keyframes, as well as the graph editor and some basic expressions. Now in motion graphics here, I'm going to give you a brief basic example. I'm going to create a new text layer. Let's go text. And we're just going to call this one text 01. Just very generic. And we can center up in the middle. So a lot of times for transitions, your text is always going to be moving. It's probably not going to be fading in, fading out. We're probably always going to be animating our text. And when we edit stuff, maybe we can make it appear from the left side, so we can just drag it over here, off screen. And then usually we would just kind of keyframe it, maybe 10 frames in. And we'll just move it back to the original point. And then it's going to chill there for a while, and then it's going to exit the scene eventually. So we're just going to push it out this way. And you know, it's a very, very basic animation. You wouldn't think there's too much complexity involved. But if you play this back, it looks very, very amateur-like. It looks very, very linear, and it just doesn't look exciting at all. Very, very boring and very, very static, and things are just kind of moving in. There's no variation. And again, that's what we want in animation. We want some variation. So a few quick ways to kind of add some variation is to kind of ease your frames. As you can see, it's very, very static again, and things just come to an abrupt stop. So we can ease these two keyframes here. Either hit F9 or go to Animation, Keyframe Assistance, and ease. And that's just going to nicely ease our keyframes in. As you can see, it's a little bit better than the linear keyframes. It kind of just smoothly comes to a stop and then smoothly leaves. And of course, you can change these keyframes to anything else you want. So in the animation keyframe assistant, you can change to ease in, which is going to cause keyframes to kind of ease in into the animation, the movement, or we can ease out. It just depends on what you're doing. But for ease, F9 for this situation, I think it's okay. So that's looking okay. But what about the graph editor? The graph editor is a really powerful and a really great way to animate your stuff and adjust your keyframes visually. So if you're a visual person, the graph editor is going to play a large role in this. So to open your graph editor, make sure that you have your graph editor right here. And just go ahead and toggle the graph editor. And you can visually see what's happening with the keyframes here. So let's go ahead and go back and just make these all linear keyframes once again. So now they're all linear. And then back to the graph editor. Make sure you select your position keyframes. And you can see that things are very, very linear. As you can see, we just have some straight lines from one keyframe to another, some straight lines to the next keyframe, and so on and so forth. So it's very, very blocky, as you see here in the graph editor. And that's the reason why our animation is pretty blocky. So if you want to create some handles, we can just highlight some keyframes here. And we can just convert to Bezier, this button right here. And this is going to automatically create some Bezier curves. And of course, this is all customizable. So if we just zoom in here to get some more room, you can see that we have these nice handles. And these you can use to adjust the kind of velocity of your graph here. So let's say we want our animation to smoothly come in. We can actually make this part really quick at the beginning. We can kind of give it a nice fling shot. So kind of make it more abrupt. And then things are slowly going to fade in here, as you see here. And we can just smooth that out a little bit more. And then same for this keyframe right here. We can just adjust these to make sure that they're Bezier. And then we can kind of just smooth this out a little bit. Adjust these. You know, something like that. And you can see right away you'll get a different effect. So let's go ahead and do a RAM preview. So as you can see, it kind of gives it this nice fling shot at the beginning, kind of flies in real fast and then eventually slows down. And it just gives it more life to your animation here. So if I go ahead and duplicate this text layer, turn off the graph editor, and just delete the keyframes for now. And this is going to be our text 2 title, and we're just going to bring it down here, and this is going to be used as a comparison. So I'm going to change this to text 02, and text 02, there's no graph editor applied to it. We're not going to play around with these settings, so we're just going to animate it from here. Let's move it off screen to -134.1, and we're just going to move it over here at 640. Keyframe it, and then at the end here we'll just set it to 1432. So now we just have the same 2 texts animating at the same rate, but we can see if we play around with the graph editor, you'll get some pretty different results. So as you can see, one looks linear and one looks a lot better, more stylized, and you know, it's just that kind of little detail that plays a large role in this. And if you apply some motion blur to it, you'll see some interesting results. And of course, it takes tons and tons of practice. You're going to need to practice quite a bit to kind of get the hang of using the graph editor and kind of get a sense of, you know, what looks right and what looks wrong and how you can play around with the graph to make it look a little bit more lively. So if you don't exactly get the graph editor right now, definitely play around with it and to see, you know, what works and what doesn't work and what looks right and what doesn't look right. So now that we kind of have the basics covered, I just want to introduce you guys to some really cool expressions. Now the expressions are somewhat basic, but they would take forever to explain this video tutorial. And for time saving sakes, I want to expose you guys to some pretty awesome motion graphics resources as well. So we're going to be taking a look at Dan Ebert's site over here at motionscript.com. And the URL for this link will be in the notes section. But basically, Dan Ebert's site is just a really great site for some awesome expressions for animation and motion graphics. It's just a whole bunch of things. So you can see that we have a whole bunch of stuff here, like Bezier curves that we just talked about. We have some random grid movements. We have squash and stretch, which we'll be taking a look at in a second. But let me just show you what these do. So right here, I have a pendulum right here. And if I just do a quick RAM preview, you can see that we just have this nicely moving pendulum right here. And you can just imagine how hard it would be to kind of animate this thing to look realistic. So just to demonstrate, I'm going ahead and duplicate this thing right here. I'm going to shut this one off for now. And I'm going to disable the expressions. So it's static. And we're just going to animate the rotation here. So let's start at the beginning. And let's go ahead and just hit a keyframe for the rotation. We can make it start right here. And we can move a few seconds in and just, you know, move it over here. And then move it a little bit less. And then move it a little bit less. You know, I mean, it's very, very time consuming and very painstaking. And if we do a quick RAM preview, looks very, very choppy, looks very, very linear. So once again, you can go into the graph editor and kind of play around with the graph to make it less linear. So you'll want kind of swing effect, and it kind of slows down, gets to the top, and then swings down again. So you want to play around with the graph editor, play around with the keyframes to really achieve a more realistic effect. Now, the reason why I mentioned Dan Ebert's site is because he provides really awesome expressions, once again, for movements. So for an example, he has a expression for the pendulum right here. And of course, this can be applied in so many ways. You know, don't just think of this as a certain effect for a pendulum. This can be used for text, for anything that involves rotation. And the great part about Dan Everett's site is he provides a really awesome description of what the expression does, what does it mean, how to edit the expression. So it's a really great resource if you want to learn After Effects expressions. So it says here to apply the following expression to the rotation property. So let's go ahead and copy this expression here. And then I'm going to go back into After Effects. And then I'm just going to apply this to the rotation. So I'm going to delete these keyframes. Get out of the graph editor here. And I'm going to go ahead and paste it into the rotation here. So if you want to apply an expression, just hold down Alt and click on the rotation. Hold down Alt or Option and then click on the keyframe. And then you can just paste the expression into the expression for the rotation. And right away you can have a nice realistic pendulum effect. So as you can see, more realistic, and uses some pretty complicated sine and cosine stuff here, and velocity, all that complicated math stuff. So we can change the velocity down to maybe 5, so it's less of a swinging effect, and the amplitude is kind of the amount. Make it to 50. You can see we have a more subtle effect. So as you can see, expressions can be very powerful. And Dan Everett's site is the site to be at if you want to have some pretty nice resources for movement, motion graphics, and how to learn some basic expressions within After Effects. So really great site. Another quick one would be the squash and stretch one right here. And this one we apply to the scale, and you can see kind of a preview demo of what this thing does right here. Have that nice squishy jello effect, and you'll be using this thing quite a bit in text, especially if you're trying to incorporate text for kind of that bouncy jelly effect, maybe for a trampoline or maybe some food. So I have an example here with that same expression applied to some text here. So as you can imagine, if you did this in a very linear fashion, it would look very boring and very bland. But with the nice expressions applied to it, and if you mess around with the graph editor, you can achieve some pretty nice wobbling, more realistic, lively effects for your text or your layers or whatever you want. So let's go ahead and set this thing up real quick just to show you basically how you do this. I'm going to delete these two. I'm going to create a new text layer, and we're just going to call this bounce. And we're just going to center this thing up. So basically what he tells you to do is to animate this thing falling first. So let's hit P. We're going to bring this up at a screen. We're going to keyframe it, maybe about 10 frames or so. We're going to make it drop to maybe the center right here. So basically we just have text falling down. And that's going to be the animation part. So we can actually cut this layer down. We don't need this layer anymore. We just want this layer for the actual falling part. So we're going to cut it off. And then we're going to duplicate it. And then we're going to extend it. And this is going to be the wobbling part. So we can just trim this one off here. Trim this down. So this is just going to be the actual falling part. And then it's going to cut off, and this is just going to be this, the bouncy part. So we're going to apply this expression to the scale parameter. So if you just hit S on the keyboard to bring up the scale parameter, and we're just going to paste the expression in, as you see here. And you can see we have a nice bouncing effect. And you can just keep on duplicating text layers and keep on repeating this process until you get a pretty nice little animation here. And if we apply some motion blur to our text, that really just enhances the whole thing. So I hope that gave you a brief idea on how to use expressions, how to use keyframes, and how to use the graph editor to really enhance your motion graphics and typography. Again, the graph editor, the keyframes, and expressions play a large role in motion graphics. You're always going to be editing your keyframes in every single project, so definitely get used to it. Definitely play around with it. In the next video tutorial, we're going to be taking a look at how to create some lower thirds, We're going to talk about how to build some basic ones, as well as how to animate and render them for post-production, so you can put it into Premiere or Final Cut. So definitely look forward to that. If you guys have any further questions, don't hesitate to leave them in the forums. I'll get to them as soon as I can. And once again, guys, I'm Vincent Nguyen, and thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you guys in the next lesson. Bye, guys.